to the Mavs Fans for Life podcast. I am Landon Thomas, joined by my co-host, Shahnavaz Makhani. And Shahnavaz, this episode we'll be talking about the All-Star starters who were named.
Yep.
We'll be talking about the struggles with the Mavericks, the losing streak, and how do they bounce back? What do they have to do? Or who do they have to go get? And then also we'll be talking about Luka's complaints with the refs. Feels like we've been talking about that, but it keeps happening, so we have to talk about it. So first of all, let's get into the starters that were announced for the All-Star game for 2024 in Indianapolis. We'll start with the East. First of all, how do you feel about the West versus East? It's back.
It's back. I love it. I'm glad they're not doing this stupid draft thing that they've been doing the last few years. Whatever.
Pick up.
Yeah, they've tried this whole thing. I mean, then it's just LeBron getting a bunch of his buddies together and playing. I mean, it's a banana boat all over again. So I like East versus West. I think it gives you parity. It gives you a little bit more, gives it a little bit more competitiveness.
Yes.
And it goes back, that's how the All-Star game should be. That's how I remember it back in the day when, it was Shaq and Kobe against like AI and everyone, in the mid 2000s and stuff. So that's how it should be.
Yeah, and it's great to get away from the last player being picked. I mean, that's been the story the last few years. And, this person's waiting, one person left and the walk of shame to the team that's left. But So I'm so excited to see West versus East. It should have stayed that way. They just wanted to spice it up. It really didn't. It didn't work out. Just make it competitive again. West versus East. I want to see, obviously, with these rosters. Let's get into these rosters. So East starters are Giannis Antetokounmpo, Joel Embiid, Jason Tatum, Tyrese Halliburton, and Damian Lillard. So Lillard sparked some engagement because they were tied. He was tied with Jalen Brunson, but the fan vote pushed Lillard up. So just what's your thoughts on that? And then what's your thoughts on the starting lineup for the East?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the starting lineup is I'm with the camp that thinks it should have been Jalen Brunson. I think Brunson should have made it over Dame. But that's where the fan voting comes in, and that's 50% of the vote, right? And so, I think outside of New York, Dame Lillard is a more kind of beloved player by fans. You've obviously got Milwaukee fans. I'm sure Portland fans still, really appreciate him. And then you've got fans all across the country that are big Damian Lillard fans. Just the style of play and some of the clutch shots he's hit over the last few years. Him being in the postseason a lot. So I think he obviously has a bigger following than what Jalen Brunson does. So the fan vote going to him, I mean, that makes complete sense to me. So I can't really argue with it. I would have put Brunson over if we're just looking, holistically, kind of who've been the best players in the East this year. I think it should have been Halliburton and Brunson, but hey, that's the way the voting is right now. Is it's 50% fan vote, and that's going to go to a guy like Dame over Brunson any day of the week.
Yeah, it really boils down to New York. I mean, isn't that the biggest market? I mean, where's the fans at? Because they're the ones that didn't get Brunson over the top into the starting lineup. And I mean, he's gonna be an all-star, so it really doesn't make a difference. But a lot of people, they keen in on those being a starter. I mean, when you go to Wikipedia, you don't see all-star starter, you just see all-star. But that is a big difference. I mean, especially for a team that doesn't have all-star starters. I mean, they always, you see Randall, you see different guys, Porzingis or Carmelo Anthony is probably the last person who's really got that shine. So it's been a while. That would have meant a lot to the Knicks fan base. But, like you said, Damian is more well known and he's a bigger name. So the fan vote ultimately took precedence in the starters. So I think that was a big testament to Dame, honestly, because we talked about this a little bit in the past on just the teams and just the players in the East with the point guards, and you have these you have because you're missing out Tyrese Maxey, you're missing out Trey Young,
Yep.
you're missing out Donovan Mitchell. It's hard in the East. It's kind of funny because when Kyrie left, you really have. I mean, obviously there's two guard spots, but it's really a toss up on who's the best point guard in the East. Like you could have like 5 or
True.
6 players in the East. I mean, Donovan Mitchell's more of a shooting guard, but he's been playing point guard with Garland now.
Yeah.
Oh, Garland's another name when he comes back. Well, obviously for next year with the All-Star game, but there's a lot of good, solid point guards in the East, but I don't know if one of them stands. Maybe is it Halliburton?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, if you're looking just right now, kind of like who's the best point guard in the East, I mean, it's probably Halliburton. You're right. I didn't think about, after Kyrie left, it kind of the well is kind of dry in terms of point guards in the East. I mean,
Because he was
you can
like
make
number one across the board last year. He was the All-Star
yeah,
starter.
yeah, you can make a case for Halliburton. I mean, Brunson's got a case. Dame's up there, obviously. Trey Young, I think, has regressed. To your point, Darius Garland, Tyrese Maxey, I think in another year or two, you could probably put up there. I think he's just now starting to get to, he's kind of getting into his, that next level after James Harden left.
Yeah.
So I
Oh
think
yeah,
that,
Harden too. Yeah.
yeah, I think that's that's going to be a really interesting, um, kind of topic going forward. Because I think the West, you're kind of set for the next like decade, right? In terms of who your top 2 point guards are. In the
Yeah.
East, pretty fluid. So I think, you're going to see a lot of shifting parts. And of course, trades are going to happen and things like that. The one thing I found interesting was if you look at that fan vote, talking about, Damian, Lillard, Halliburton finished first in the fan voting for point guards. Number 2, surprisingly, was Trey Young. So
Yeah.
Trey Young finished ahead of Jalen Brunson in fan voting, which was kind of surprising to me because, to your point, New York is the biggest media market in the in the country, and it's like you're not even voting for your own guy to get in.
Yeah. It's like Booker with the Suns.
Yeah,
I think Trey is more flashy. I mean, obviously Brunson is so good, but he's not flashy. I mean, he's just a solid, quality point guard. Like he gets the job done, and that really fits the Knicks.
it does. Yeah,
their identity.
it fits Tibbs' system too. Like for all the talk of
Yeah,
would he fit in with New York? I mean, he's been great the last the last 2 years that he's been there. I mean, he's and the Knicks are playing really well, defensively and offensively. So I mean, it's great to see. I mean, we've talked about this a lot, but he's a guy, Jalen Brunson, you want to see succeed, right? Being a second round pick and obviously won a title in college at Villanova, but you want to see him kind of succeed on his own path after leaving Dallas. So it's good to see. I'm happy for him, and I'm happy that basketball is always better when the Knicks are good, right? Because
yeah,
it adds more flash, it adds more intrigue. It makes games more fun to watch when you can hear the crowd and you see this, the stars and the celebs out at Madison Square Garden. So I think it's fun when the Knicks are good. So I'm really happy, and I'm glad it's Brunson who's the one paving the way and kind of leading that team.
yeah, and obviously they'll be even better with Mitchell Robinson coming back next season, and you just hope that I've talked about this. We talked about. I just hope he takes the next step where we can stop hearing rumors about them. Looking for a superstar, looking for a bona fide all-star.
Donovan rumor's not going to die.
Yeah, to take the ball out of Brunson's hands to basically put him back in the position of where he was in Dallas as the second fiddle, and that's what happened. Not only with Mitchell, with the rumors, they're even talking. Well, it's rumors. You know how I feel about rumors, but just DeJounte Murray, like they're looking at these guards to take the ball out of his hands just to add more star power. But shout out to him. Hopefully, he just keeps progressing, so you don't even have to have that conversation. So, do we even have to talk about Giannis, Embiid, or Tatum? I mean, that's a no-brainer, right?
No, I mean, That's exactly who should have been. I don't think there's any question.
Okay, so let's go to the Western Conference. I mean, this you can say that about this starting lineup.
Yeah.
LeBron James, Kevin Durant, Nikola Jokic, Luka Dončić, and SGA. Is there anything that stood out to you with that starting lineup?
Not really. I mean, I think Phoenix's recent surge, and I think again the popularity of Kevin Durant, like he was, I think he what was he second in forwards, or second or third, I think in front court players. So I don't have an issue there. I'm a huge Kevin Durant fan, obviously, because I went to Texas, the same time he did. So I'm always going to cheer for him and root for him. I don't think there was any surprise. I mean, Anthony Edwards getting left off kind of sucks because he's had a great year, but you look at the two guys ahead of him, and Luka and SGA, who've had better years than Anthony Edwards. So that kind of goes back to my point earlier of like, I think you can pencil those two in at the guard spot for the next 10, 12 years. Like, they're
Yeah,
both young, like under 25. I think Shea's 25. Luka's about to be 25. So really, I mean, the next decade, you can probably pencil them in, assuming they both stay in the Western Conference. I mean, it's gonna be hard for guys like Ant and other guards in the Western Conference to get to kind of get in that spot. I mean, it's gonna take an injury or just a really bad year, by one of those two guys or their teams, for them to not get voted in. But the fan vote, like they're gonna get the fan vote because you have to realize that they're also international, right? Shea's got the Canadian vote, that's gonna come in. And Luka's got all the Slovenians and Europeans in the states that are going to vote for him. So
yeah.
um, I think they're gonna probably hold that up going forward. And LeBron and Jokic, I mean, I don't think there's anything that needs to be said about them. As bad as the Lakers have been playing, I mean, LeBron's arguably the most popular player in NBA history, so he's gonna continuously get that as long as he plays. And Jokic is dominating again like he always does. So there's no surprise there on my end. I'm interested to see the reserves though, because that's going to be, I think there's going to be a lot of debate against guys like Lauri Markkanen, guys like Rudy Gobert, who's going to get in, Karl Anthony Towns. It's going to be really, really interesting to see, who the reserves are for the Western Conference, because I think that's going to be where the debate is going to be, because you look at the teams in both conferences, the West is stacked. I mean, you've got
Yeah.
8 teams that are pretty much neck and neck with each other, after the second seed versus the East. You've got your top three, and then there's a pretty dramatic drop off, from there in terms of, quality of teams. So I
Yeah.
think it's going to be really interesting once we get the reserve list and kind of see, what the conversation is around that.
Well, there's only 7 spots.
Yeah, it's
So
going
I
to be hard.
mean, it's gonna be hard. And when I look at the starters, I mean, this is pretty much a no-brainer. I did think there was a small chance that Curry could have got in just on the power of the fan vote alone, like you said, 50%, because he was number 2 in the fan vote, and he finished number 3 overall. He was ahead of Anthony Edwards.
Yeah,
Kyrie was number 5 overall. So that you could see the power of the fan vote and how much it does play into these starters being announced. And with Curry now not in that starting lineup, it seems like he was there like the past 10 years with outside of the injury, where he didn't make it. But it's like that's very telling on how the future is going. With, like you said, Luka and SGA, I mean, they could do this for the next 10 years, just being starters, not even all stars. If they're on this path that they're on, they could be even longer. Hopefully, SGA sustains it, because
yeah,
we've seen it from Luka the past 5 years. Hopefully, he can transcend into that superstardom for a period of time, like he is doing this season. And it also is not just team wins. Like, you can do this without, people around you. You've seen Luka. I mean, half the time his team is in the top 5. The other time his team is outside that top 5 in the West. So I would just like to see him sustain it. But that's very telling where the future is, because
Mhm.
Curry is not announced as a starter. Obviously, he'll probably be an all-star, but it's just mind-boggling how you have the future with those two, and then you have Jokic, who's kind of in the middle. He's in his prime, in the middle of his prime, and the two guards haven't even reached their prime yet. And then you have LeBron and KD, the old timers.
Yep.
KD's 35 and LeBron's 39. So who knows? Would this see that brings me back to the fan voting, because can we see LeBron just keep making a run until he retires? I mean, he's 39. He'll probably play what? Just assuming at least probably 2 more years and call it a
Yeah.
wraps. I
Yeah, I
mean,
would say too, because I think his son potentially is going to come out in the draft this year. So, and I know he wants to play with him. So, I think it's going to be probably another 2 years, depending. I mean, if his son goes back to USC, he'll probably come back, sign just a 1-on-1 with the Lakers again. What's interesting to me is, you bring up Jokic and you look at the center, the East. We talked about the guards in the East and how it's like, well, who's the best guard? And there's so many quality, point guards, but not one has kind of stood out, right? In the West, you look at the center position, it's like, all right, obviously it's Nikola Jokic, but in the next couple of years, like as Jokic potentially starts to decline, and I'm in that camp where I don't think Jokic is going to play his entire career in the NBA. I think if they win another ring, or within the next 5 years, I think he's going to retire and go back, to his cow farm or whatever he does.
you think he'll retire at 34?
Yeah, I don't. He
33,
doesn't seem
34?
like the type of guy that wants to play, till he's 40 in the NBA,
Yeah.
right? Like I think he got his ring, he's got his MVPs. He'll give it another couple of years, and then I think he'll probably go back and maybe he'll do whatever, right? Back, with his brothers in Serbia. What's going to be interesting in the next couple of years is that battle between Wemby and Chet, because you're talking about guys that don't like each other, that are going to be in that front court spot, as Kevin Durant kind of ages out, LeBron ages out. You're going to see this changing of the guard going into Wemby and Chet, and guys like Karl-Anthony Towns, guys like, for now, Rudy Gobert. It's going to be Derek Lively. Can he make a run up there in terms of All-Star voting? It's going to be really cool to see, because I think point guard's pretty much locked down, but the front court in the Western Conference is going to be something to watch for the next few years. I think it's going to be really fascinating.
Yeah, it is. And you also forgot, Kawhi. We haven't talked about Kawhi.
Kawhi's amazing. I mean, best season he's had in years.
Yeah, and then also Sabonis. Big Al in Houston.
If Zion can stay healthy.
Yeah, Brandon Ingram, Zion. There's a lot of front court members who have all-star quality skills, but it's going to be interesting, that next wave of the future, like you mentioned, in Paul George. I mean, there's still a lot of candidates. This is tough. I'm trying to think. 7 spots. Okay, so 7 spots. You would think that's going to be tough. So who would you say would be in the final 7 spots of the West? Because, you still got Sabonis, De'Aaron Fox. You got Harden, who could possibly make it. But you got Kawhi there. So who would you say in the final? Obviously Anthony Edwards. So
yeah, Edwards, Curry, Kawhi.
See, that's already 3.
I would put Lauri Markkanen in there.
Okay.
Man. I would
Karl-Anthony Towns?
Karl-Anthony Towns, yeah. I wouldn't put Rudy Gobert in there. I know he's leading the league in blocks, but I don't think that quantifies you to be a all-star. Paul George has had a really good year. Maybe one of the Kings, De'Aaron Fox, Sabonis. You could consider Sengun going to get votes.
You run out of spots, man.
It's so hard. Western Conference is so difficult.
Yeah, it is. And
Anthony Davis has had a great year. That's
Zion. Yeah,
Zion, there's a lot of good players in the Western Conference.
Yeah, and that's like you mentioned earlier. It'll be a lot easier in a few years, like you pointed out with LeBron and KD and others, Curry. I mean, when the older players retire,
Yeah.
or I don't see them playing longer than 4 years. So it's gonna be interesting. It'll be a lot easier for these young pups to get in this game. But man, do you think the 12 spots is enough, or do you think it should be 15?
No, I think 12 is good. You normally run 12-man rotations anyway in the
Yeah,
NBA. I think it kind of pairs. If you have 15, I mean,
everybody will
then
be
it's
all
just
star.
you're taking like half the players in the league. Let's just like let's calm down a little bit, you know?
Yeah. Okay, so the reserves will be announced next Thursday, but let's get into some of the Mavs struggles. They've lost 4 of the last 5. They're currently on a 3-game losing streak. Quality teams, uh, even though the records might not say it, but Lakers are still a quality team. Celtics, the best team in the league, and then the Suns, who are the hottest team right now in the league.
Yeah.
So, what sticks out to you the most when you look at the Mavs struggles right now? Is it just injuries, or is there something beneath that? What's the deep layered issue with this team right now?
There's a couple things, right? When I think of what's the issue with the Mavs, the injuries obviously play a concern because if you look at, and it's not just, the fact that Dante Exum was out so long, but Kyrie's been out, the last couple of games. Was injured in that Boston game, was injured, felt like he was injured in the Lakers game, when he took that hit from LeBron. Luka's missed time, recently. This team hasn't been at full strength in a while. When they were, I think they started the season, 8-2, 8-3 maybe. So we've seen them succeed, in positions where they've had, kind of their full roster. So I think injuries definitely do play a part of it. But for me, it goes back to something that you and I talked about a while ago, and it's when the 3-pointer's not falling, this team is really bad getting back in transition.
Yeah,
And the Mavericks take the second most threes and make the second most threes in the NBA. They're right behind Boston. Um, it against Boston, it just so happened that Boston just kept hitting them. And I think the biggest concern for me is, and it was really evident in Phoenix, and I know we'll get to officiating later, but I think I when this team starts missing threes, it's like they lose all confidence, right? It's
yeah,
like they can't adjust on the fly, and obviously part of that has to do with coaching. And I know there's a lot of criticism going around with Jason Kidd, and rightfully so. There's seems like every year we kind of get optimistic about some of the changes that are made, and we get to this point in late January, and we're like, all right, here we are again.
yeah,
Um, I think a lot of it has to do with adjustments. One thing that I think Phoenix did really well, if you go back, if you remember in the game, Luka was blitzing Nurkic the entire game. A lot of the Mavs threes were coming off pick and roll action against Yusuf Nurkic. And what Frank Vogel essentially did was he just took Nurkic out of the game and just went with a small lineup. And they were able to switch everything. They were able to cover the 3-pointer well. It's not like the Mavs weren't getting good looks, but
mm,
as soon as 1 or 2 or 3 of those don't fall, it's, you've got to be able to adjust on the fly and start, driving the paint, or at least taking some mid-rangers. We saw Devin Booker and the Suns, who couldn't hit a 3 to save their life in the first quarter, started adjusting and went to the mid-range and started, working the ball around to get a good look to Grayson Allen. And, it felt like the Mavs, like every time it was one player in the corner, they would just take a 3. And it feels like without Kyrie, this offense reverts back to what it was last year, and it's just Luka try to drive and then kick it back out, or Luka try a momentum stopping step back 3, when you're triple covered. And it's like,
hmm
it's really frustrating because there's so many nitpicky things that are, and I'm not a coach by any means. I've never even sniffed playing in the NBA, but it feels like these are just adjustments that need to be made, and the Mavericks just aren't making them.
yeah,
It's simple things like, if you miss a 3, get back in transition, try to get an easier look, what does your play sheet look like when that kick out 3, and, if you miss 3-4 in a row, like if that's not working, that's going to obviously close the gap. That's an 8-point swing there. If they get 2s off every 4 misses, that's an 8-point swing within 2 minutes. Like
yep,
that's huge in the NBA. So I think there's a lot of things that are problematic right now. with Dallas, and it's not, I know we had said for a while it was the injuries, and yes, the injuries have a part to play in it, but there's a lot more stuff on a granular level that's pretty concerning for this team after losses, to your point, to good teams. But the Mavericks had a huge lead against Phoenix. Like, that's not a game that they
Yeah,
should have lost.
16
Not
point
even
lead.
lost, got blown out. Like losing by two after being up by that much in the first quarter, sure. Okay, you had a bad game. Phoenix has three superstars. I get it. But getting blown out the way they did when you had such a significant lead in the first quarter, it's inexcusable.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, when I look at the Mavs struggles, I look at a few things. I look at injuries. That's obviously the surface level. And then I'm not gonna harp on injuries because we talked about it all
Yeah.
season. But second is a talent gap. I mean, it
Yeah.
really is. It's just a talent gap. The teams that they're playing, we talked about this gauntlet of games. I mean, they're not playing cupcakes anymore, And then three is Jason Kidd. Like you just mentioned, he's not making adjustments. He's when things are getting, like you mentioned with the Nurkic, I mean, he didn't counteract that adjustment. He just kept playing the same thing, and that's not, when you don't make adjustments, you're going to see blown leads, and that's what you're seeing with the Mavericks. You're seeing them be up in the first quarter when everything is going good, when they're making their shots, and when they don't make their shots, they don't adjust, and or when the other team makes a move to counteract them, they don't adjust. So that's the thing that's sticking out the most, is not adjusting, because they are, which leads me to my next point, is live or die by the three. And hopefully they catch on in the third quarter. Hopefully they catch on in the fourth quarter and make a run, and it doesn't happen. So they're either on or off, and that's what it really boils down to. That's why you see them beat good teams and they lose to bad teams, or they get blown out by good teams. And that's the problem, is they're so live or die by the three. And obviously, just look at THJ for example. He's pretty much the identity of the Mavericks, with the of the Mavericks role players, by live or die by the three. Because in their wins that THJ's played in, 23 games, he's averaging 20.3 points per game, and he's shooting 40% from the three at 9.9 attempts per game. In the 18 losses that he's played in, he's averaging 15.3 points per game, and he's shooting 31.2% from three. 18 games, and that's at 7.7 attempts per game. So you're looking, and then you know what that leads to? Bad shots, when you're not making good shots. So you really have all this pressure leaning on Luka and Kyrie to really take over games, and that's not going to work down the stretch of the season. Or if they make the playoffs, that's not going to work. So that's what really boils down to, is just the injuries, the talent gap, kids adjustments, heavily focused on the stars playing good, the two stars playing good, and relying on role players to make threes. And I think that really paints the picture for this team over the next 2 weeks, that this team obviously needs another starter. They need to bring in someone who you can rely on when Kyrie is injured, or when he's off, or when Luka's out and he has a stinger, or if he's having a stinker of a game, you have a third guy. And we talked about it, doesn't have to be an all-star, it just has to be a solidified third option. Because when you look at THJ, half the time you think, oh, okay, he can be a third option. He's making all these points, 20 points per game when they win, and he's making all these threes, but he's not a third option. He is a good sixth man, and that's his role that he thrives in, because he is inconsistent to be a starter. But you need him as your, at best, fourth best guy. Like, you need him really as a fifth, as your fifth option. But that's what the Mavs need to do. They need to bring in somebody that can just be a solidified 16 points per game every game at an efficient rate.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the thing that the Mavericks can't do is try to go all in. in the next
No, yeah.
right? Like I know people are clamoring for
Especially mid-season.
yeah, like make a big deal, like make a big swing. First off, I don't think the Mavericks have the assets to go get anybody big. Like I don't
True.
know, and I've said this before. The best currency right now in the NBA when it comes to trading and trade capital is draft picks. Like gone are the days where you could swap stars or you could swap, players, for another guy. Like now, look at Pascal Siakam, right? Look at what would they get 3 first round picks for him,
Yeah.
and with Bruce Brown, Bruce Brown's a good player, but he's nowhere on the level of a Pascal Siakam.
But Siakam's on an expiring. That makes things different.
Right, but to still give up that much draft capital for a guy, like you're banking on, oh, fingers crossed, can we re-sign him? Like,
Yeah.
And my point is the Mavericks don't have that, right? Like that's going to come in the summer. Once that pick conveys to the Knicks, the Mavericks then will have 3 first round picks plus 2 swaps. That's when you can go out and make a big swing, right? If the other thing that the Mavericks have to be aware of is these big swings that you have to take. Like you have to be on the right timetable to do it,
Yeah.
right? Like you can't just take a swing and hope and pray for the best and hope it vaults you 7 spots in the standings. Like you've got to be close. Like you've got to have a good core. You've got to have a good nucleus, a good coach. We all panned the Minnesota move when they got Gobert, but it's worked out pretty well for them because they've developed guys like Anthony Edwards. They got a leader and a point guard of Mike Conley. Jaden McDaniels is a great on-ball defender. Like that team has been built properly for as much fun as we made of them for getting, for trading that much for Rudy Gobert. Like for them, it's worked out so far, right? Boston, who would have thought Milwaukee would trade Drew Holiday, as close as they were for a championship, but Boston was right there. What did Boston say? All right, we've got to get another defender. Marcus Smart was key for them, was a cornerstone player for them. But when you can upgrade that to get a guy like Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis, you do it, right? Like the Mavericks, the problem is, like to your point, Landon, the construction of this roster is just not there yet. And when you go from making the conference finals to not making the playoffs and losing Jalen Brunson in the process, you've got to take a step back. And I think that's kind of where we are. Is we're in kind of like year 1.5 of that post step back plan, right? Like the step back was, okay, we lost Brunson. Let's just see what happens, right? The finality of that was, all right, we got to go out and get Kyrie. Boom, you go get Kyrie. Next step, we've got to get a big man. Okay, let's go get a cheap one. Instead of that, better yet, let's go draft one. Let's draft Derek Lively. Now you're kind of in part B of like a part A through D plan, right? So you're not even in the middle of it yet. So this summer is going to be very, very critical for Dallas to kind of see like what kind of team can they put around them. And Jason Kidd said this, I think, in the press conference. Again, after the loss against Phoenix, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I know you were there, but he said something along the lines of, when you play minimum players this much, veteran minimum players that haven't played a lot, they're going to eventually like get tired and, they've got to kind of get back to the way they were playing.
Yeah.
Well, that's your core issue. The Mavericks are relying on 2 minimum players to be, top 5 rotation players.
Yeah.
Like, that's not going to fly. Like most other teams that have, minimum contract veteran players, like guys like Derek Jones Jr. or Dante Exum, are riding the bench, or they're like 8th, 9th, 10th men coming off the bench.
Yeah.
You look at any of the top teams, like most of their starters are first round picks or guys they traded for or acquired through trade, and these other minimum guys are coming off the bench giving good minutes, but they're not playing key roles in championship pushes. So this whole notion that the Mavericks should blow it up and do this and do that and make a big swing. No, like this roster's got to get better, and that takes time. And unfortunately, the really crappy part about that, being a Mavs fan, is the Mavericks are on a timetable, right? Like you've got another 3 years of Luka, and like that's in the back of everyone's minds. But unfortunately, when you go through something like what the Mavericks went through with what happened 2 years ago after making the conference finals, you've got to kind of just reset, and you've got to revamp this roster, and that takes time. Unfortunately, it's not an overnight quick fix.
The root of the problem is the role players aren't playing good.
Yeah,
because even if you get to the off season and you have the draft capital to make a trade, and that goes to my point about Siakam. Obviously, he'll most likely re-sign with the Pacers just because the cash that they're going to offer him, that they can offer him. It's harder to get a solidified star
Mhm.
without the role players to go along with that draft capital. You would have to
Yeah.
get a Porzingis type guy that they did who had injuries. You would have to go get a Kyrie Irving who's on expiring and had issues with the Nets front office. I mean,
Or a
you
guy who just says, I want to go play in Dallas. Like,
exactly. So you would have to really be creative, which Nico is doing with trades to bring in those um, type of flexibility with Dinwiddie and Bertans to set up domino effects later on, and to surround Luka and Kyrie with the best bet. And like you said, they lucked out. They honestly lucked out with Lively
mhm.
um, being so good at his age, where he is a solidified starter this early. And honestly, you can even go back with Luka. Luka was so good that he rushed their rebuild.
Yeah.
And that's the honest root of the Mavs problem. Luka was so good that he rushed their rebuild, because you could have had just at least one more draft where you get a top 5 pick, and
Yeah.
then that would have set them up. Look at the Thunder. How many lottery picks do they have? I mean, and look at the Minnesota. You're looking at these guys that had at least, you had Towns, you had Edwards, you have at least 2 guys in the top 5 where you can set
Tatum
a
and
true
Brown,
rebuild.
right?
All these teams are at the top. I mean, you really have to be creative surrounding one star like Milwaukee did. I mean, obviously Chris Middleton was an all-star, but we're talking about surrounding, having good eye for talent and scouting and developing around your one star, or you have to draft 2 guys in the rebuild that are top 5 where you can, you know, then start winning. But Luka was so good, they didn't have that chance to do that. And Dennis Smith Jr. didn't pan out either. He was top 10 pick. So they don't have draft picks good enough to get a star. Lively, they tanked 2 games to actually get Lively. So that's pretty much it. Like, you have to be creative with trades now. And that's really what you're going to see.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I mean, the Porzingis deal, I mean, at the time, like, I know I was excited for it, and it sucks that it didn't work out, right? It's like, it's just one of those things where,
But even then,
unfortunately,
he's not a number 2 or a number 3.
no,
I
and
mean,
look at him in
he's a,
Boston. He's thriving. He's thriving in Boston as like a number
as a
4.
third 4
Yeah,
option.
and we try to put it in, try to make him into something he's not, and the injuries hit, and the whole issue with Carlisle, and whatever was going on in the front office at the time. I mean, there's so much, there's so much, so many storylines from that kind of era that we could look back on. But
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. Like, you look at any, like, I mean, any team that's been in the finals, or is a top finals contender. I mean, they've all built their team properly, other than the Lakers, right? Who just go out and every year it's like acquire a new star with that with LeBron.
Yeah.
But every other team, like even Golden State, like even their dynasty, even they won a title before Kevin Durant. Like, people forget that. Like, that team was built from the ground up, and then Kevin Durant joined and they won more, and then they won without him. So that team, those 3 stars were all built, were all drafted by Golden State. They just put the right pieces around them, and that, unfortunately, goes back to roster construction and coaching, and it's all a cumulative kind of effect, right?
Yeah.
Like Jason Kidd's got to be better about knowing the limitations of the roster and putting players in a position to succeed. And then it's also on the players, and it's not to stay healthy, but to know their role, and I think for the most part the Mavericks have done that. Like, I think you see kind of, that the ball is going to be in Luka and Kyrie's hands, because that's just the way
Mhm.
this roster is, right? Like, you're not going to see Derrick Jones Jr. dribble. You're not going to see the ball in Grant Williams' hands that often. So I think it's unfortunate, but it's a cumulative effort. It's a cumulative effect of everything a culmination of the last 5 years, really ever since we drafted Luka. To your point, you know, giving up early draft picks to kind of accelerate the rebuild. And then after that, not really knowing how to build a team around him. And with that, with the injuries that have happened, or with the players that we've had, not being able to coach them up to what their potential is, or what their potential could be. Like, it's baffling to me that this team was in the conference finals 2 years ago, and now we're wondering if they're going to make the playoffs again.
Yeah.
Like, it's
But that's because they made their threes, and their
yeah,
defense was way better.
yeah. And you had, you have a top 5 player in the league. Like, it's so every time it's like we celebrate the good wins, like the Minnesota win, the New York win. They were all great, and you can see what Luka and Kyrie do together, right? Like how masterful they are together on the court. And then you get games like the last 3, and you're just like, what is going on? Like, it doesn't make sense. Like
Yeah.
the inconsistent nature, on a week to week basis with this team.
Yeah, and I think, and this is the last thing I'll say before we finish with Luka's complaints to the ref, which is another problem. But the thing is, I think they're relying too heavily on Luka and Kyrie. I mean, because
Yeah.
when they're playing, you want to see them score 30 points each. But it doesn't have to be that way, especially with Kyrie. He has the worst luck with injuries. I mean, he's not. You can't rely on him that much to be there every game. So
Yeah.
you have to have a third guy, and that can't be Tim Hardaway Jr. That can't be Grant Williams. And Lively, that's not his playing style. Even though he's probably the third best player on the team, or third most valuable, at least, on the team, but that's not his playing style. So you need another guy just to take the pressure off of Luka and Kyrie, and that's the problem, because the third guy that they have is THJ, and we just mentioned the inconsistency that he has in his game, and that's known. That's known for a 6-man.
Yep.
So you got to have another starter, because you can't expect Exum to play, to sustain what he was doing before the injury over a course of a season or in the playoffs, because that's not the nature of his game. To really be good, this team has to have Exum and Derek Jones as just key bench guys.
Mm-hmm.
That's the problem. They only have 3 starters. Okay, so let's get to Luka's complaints with the ref. I mean, it's the last word, and it should be the last word for Luka, maybe. So the last word of the podcast, Shahnavaz. I mean, we've seen the commotion over, I'll say, past year or two. I mean, it's really been highlighted the past couple of weeks, especially the last game, not
Yeah.
only with the refs, with the fan, and the commotion with Tim McMahon and all that stuff. But what's your thoughts on Luka's complaints to the refs? Because he does take ownership, but
Mm-hmm.
he keeps doing it. So what is your thoughts on the whole ordeal?
Yeah, I think it's immaturity, and it's not to say it in a bad way. Like
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean to say it, negatively in that aspect. I think we forget sometimes that he's 24. If we all look back to when we were 24, like, we were doing dumb crap also, and we were
Hey,
also,
don't put my business out there like that, man.
I know I was, for sure. I'll say that.
Yeah, for
How
sure.
about that? I know when I was 24, if I was told not to do something, I'd still do it. And I
Yep.
think it takes, the only person that, who can really change it is him, and it's, I think a lot of it is a result of frustration. I think in the games that the Mavericks are winning, and he's having fun, and you see them,
That's a
everyone
good
playing
point.
together, I think you don't see that. And I think it's frustration of his teammates sometimes, right? Like, and not necessarily his teammates in the sense of, I don't like my teammates. I think,
Oh
like,
no, yeah.
why are these shots not falling? Like, we're getting good looks, they're just not going down. Or frustration on, oh man, I made a bad pass, or that was a bad pass, I was open, or, things like that, like little things that, can be talked about after the game, or even in a break or a timeout. I think he just lets it get to him too much, and that kind of boils over into the refs, and that's just personal time. I think it just takes time, and I know he's talked about how he views life differently now that he has a daughter, and that's good. That's a
Yeah.
big step for him. It's going to take time, unfortunately. I think back to a couple of years ago, with Nikola Jokic, I know one of Luka's best friends. I mean, if you remember, there was a story that came out a couple of years ago. I don't remember the exact source, but he had said it was just kind of like one day he woke up and was like, man, like if I want to win, I got to change this. I got to change. Like I got to do things differently. And it just
Yeah.
kind of clicked. And you started to see a different Nikola Jokic. And that was, the first MVP year, and then here they are, world champions. So I think it's just going to take time, unfortunately. And it's a frustrating thing for Mavs fans to watch because it's like, why do you keep doing this? I think we just have to remember, like, he's still a kid, like he's immature.
Yeah.
He got all the calls in Europe, because he was the best player in the country there. It's NBA is a different game, and the refs are gonna remember, like, if you're complaining, I'm not gonna give you calls, or you'll get teed up at the end of a half like you did against Phoenix, as opposed to if he just starts taking some, and being like, whoa, bad call, and then running back. I think he'll start to see the refs kind of sway a little bit more because to his for his credit, there are plays where you're like, that's 100% a foul. Like they're just
Yeah.
not calling it. And whether it's because it's him or because they want to see if he complains, whatever the case may be, I would like to see that kind of change. But unfortunately, like Jason Kidd's got to hold him accountable. And I think he has. He said, he's going to have a conversation with Luka and when that's going to happen, whatever the case may be. I just think it's all on Luka at this point. Like he's got to get it in his head that he's got to stop doing it and just kind of get over that maturity huddle. And maybe it's a birthday thing. Maybe when he turns 25, it'll stop. So let's keep our fingers crossed for that.
I feel like 26 was just personal experience. Like I feel like 26 was when, I mean, really 30, but I feel like 26 was like the starting point where you're like, okay, I gotta start being mature. I gotta start doing mature things, and and that's why I think goes to your credit where you bring up Luka maturity. I mean, kids talk about it, but I feel like he's still a couple of years away of actually understanding the bigger picture because he blames it on not blames it, but he mentions his passion. He mentions his love of the game, and I think those are two separate things when you come to complain to the refs. You can complain to the refs. That's not even a problem, to be honest. But not when you miss a shot and you feel like you got fouled.
Yeah.
Do it during timeout. That's when you, or do it during a dead ball situation.
Exactly.
Or that's when you can complain to the refs. I think this whole ordeal is misconstrued on what the issue is. Everyone's saying, oh, he complains to the refs. Everybody complains to the refs, but you got to do it at a certain point in time of the game when it's not detrimental to the team losing. And when you're complaining to the refs for a couple seconds, that's a fast break on the other end. A lot of these teams get so many fast break points against the Mavericks. Why? Because they're on 4-on-3, 5-on-4 possessions. Because you see in the backcourt that Luka's still trying to get at it with the refs, and I mean, he was so good for the first 3 weeks of the season, and I think it points to what you said is they were winning.
Yep.
That's the problem.
There's everything.
Exactly. So when they're losing, it's all over the news on what he's doing, and that's the problem. When you're losing, you have to even with the frustrations of teammates missing shots or frustrations of actual fouls, like you mentioned, because he does get fouled half the time on those non-calls. You have to do it during dead ball situations because that's why they're not calling it.
Exactly.
That's why they're not calling it, because they're tired of you. It's like a sibling when you're growing up, constantly knocking on your door. You're not going to answer the door if they keep doing it, but when they stop doing it, you're going to creak the door open. Are they still here?
Yeah.
Are they still here? Exactly.
I think another thing, it's like, you think about the hype that was surrounding Luka, and I think we forget that he came into the league at 19, and prior to that, it was LeBron. Other 19-year-olds that have come in aren't getting the same kind of, I guess, they're not getting the same kind of treatment from from an all-star perspective, the accolades that Luka's gotten, the all-NBA first teams. And it's a credit to him, to how great he is. But I think in maybe in his mind, he thinks like, okay, I deserve these calls because of how good I am, and that may be, that may be I don't know. I'm trying to. There's no justification for it. I'm just trying to think of it from from that angle of he's really the first high profile 19-year-old that we've had in a while. Obviously Wemby's in the league now, but it's a completely different style of play. Like if Wemby gets fouled, first off, if anybody can foul him because he's so damn tall, nobody can reach him. But if somebody fouls him, it's pretty blatant because you can, because of his size.
Yeah.
Luka, because he's, in the paint a lot, it's, sometimes that gets overlooked or it's hard to see. And so I think we forget that, he came in the league at 19. He doesn't know anything but winning. Like that's all he did in Europe.
Yeah.
So I think for him, it's like a whole different type of basketball, and to not get those calls, I think is something he's going to have to learn.
Yeah, and I'm gonna tell you who does get calls, SGA,
Yeah.
and he doesn't complain to the refs.
Yep.
So I mean, if it's a compromise. It's a compromise. That's why I would say you can complain to the refs, but you have to find the moments to do it. And that's the problem that you see because SGA, he doesn't complain to the refs and he gets the calls that he wants. And I mean, he has free throw shooting highlights because that's what everyone says. He's a merchant. But Joel Embiid, he gets calls. It's just like you have to know when to do it. And if you're constantly whining to the refs at the whole game, they're not going to like you.
Yeah.
They don't like you. I mean, before the game, they'll shake your hand, but once you start complaining, they don't like you. And that goes to Jason Kidd as well. He has to be. They really have to have a sit down. And I know they talk about it in the post game. They take ownership of it. They address it, but they need to have a sit down. And just because it's Luka, I mean, top 3 player, top 5 to some people. You have to sit him down like a regular player, and you have to say, "Hey, for us to win, I know you're passionate, but for us to win, let me be the voice." And that's big of Jason Kidd because he doesn't talk during games to the refs like that. I mean, if he does, it's casual. So let me be your voice, and I think that's why I said compromise. Jason Kidd has to get out of his shell more with the refs, and Luka has to lower his verbiage to the refs. There has to be a partnership here where let me be your voice and you just go back to having fun. Go back to having fun.
And I think that, to your point, Landon, if that happens, right, if we see that version of Luka, I think that's going to reflect on his teammates also. Because I think when he is complaining and he has that bad body language, I think you can see it kind of, it kind of peel over, it kind of pours over to his teammates, right? And
especially the younger ones.
Yeah, they kind of start
Lively, Omax.
They start chucking up shots to be like, all right, we got to get back in this, otherwise, we're gonna get a pissed off Luka. Like, I think he's got to really, within the next couple of years, start owning that leadership role. And again, he's 24. Like it's hard to ask that of him now, but that's something you want to see, kind of from a growth perspective. Is he's got to kind of take on that leadership role and understand, like, doesn't matter how long somebody's played in the NBA. If they're on the Mavericks, they're going to look up to me because I'm the leader on this team. Like, I'm the best player on this team. Like, they're going to follow my lead. So I've got to show them, hey, I'm good with this. Yeah, they missed the call, but let's go. Let's stop them on the defensive end and let's get the next one. That's what he's got to do going forward.
Yeah, and you just see the difference. I'll leave it with this. You see the difference between Luka and Kyrie. Obviously, Luka doesn't have to be Kyrie. And what I mean by that is just the calmness. When things are going bad, you always see Kyrie calm. When things are going good, Kyrie's calm. That's how you have to be because the younger guys are watching that. The younger, when things go the wrong way, Kyrie goes back. He gets back on defense.
Yep.
And then during the timeout, you see him have a casual, calm conversation with the refs. And then, the younger guys, Lively, Josh Green, these guys are watching Luka complain to the refs. You don't want to see that. Obviously, I will give Luka credit because when he goes back to the bench, he talks to Lively, he talks to Green, and I see him going, all right, guys, let's get back into this. He does do that.
Yeah.
But when you're on the court, you can't do that. And I'm not saying be Kyrie and be calm no matter what. I'm just saying doing it, you have to have a balance. You can't do that all game. You have to either wait until the game is crucial in the fourth quarter, or you have to do it during timeouts or dead ball.
Yeah, 100% agree.
All right, Shahnavaz. So the Mavericks play tonight against the Hawks. What do you want to see?
Just get a win. Just please. Just get, that's all. That's all I'm asking for.
That's it.
It's not a lot. Atlanta's not a good team. They're reeling. I mean, just get.
And
Just
Trey
get
Young's
one.
in concussion protocol. So
Yeah, I mean, I know Kyrie's out, Dwight's out. You know, just get a win. You know.
yeah,
And
that's it.
give me more Jaden Hardy. I want to see more Jaden Hardy. I the kid deserves it. I mean, he's played well in his limited minutes. Like let's get him going.
There you have it, folks. Just get a win and more Jaden Hardy.